And I want to something you said that like yes, maybe like this is an important thing for trans folks, not just in the military, but of course like all across the world. There's maybe you have to be hyper aware all the time where you're legal and where you're accepted and where you're safe. Like those three things usually don't all exist in the same location, and you have to be very selective. So some of the resources that I'll send this to you actually later. There's some resources that track LGBTQ rights by state and even by country. So you can kind of figure out, hey, where do I fit in? Where is it safe for me to be? As you know, like there's state level attacks on trans rights. Like in Idaho, they're trying to ban trans people from public life altogether. Like it's illegal for you to use the restroom anywhere in Idaho if you're trans, at least on paper. There's, two-thirds of the country, it feels like has some restriction on me. And even in places where it's relatively good, I still don't have the same full set of human rights. Like when it comes to marriage or adoption or healthcare or even in places like California or Massachusetts, somewhere that's like I still have to be careful. Like, okay, does this law apply to me or not? I'm going to visit I'm going to a wedding, family wedding in next week, and it's in a state that's very unsafe for me. And so I've had to make a plan with my family, like, hey, I can go here, but I can't go here. I can go to these restaurants, but I can't go to these restaurants, and I'm not sure about this. So, I'm not sure where I can use the restroom here. So we're gonna have to schedule in these. It's exhausting, right? And that's just for basic trip planning to somewhere. Like and there's trans people who live in places like that, whether it's Idaho, Tennessee, whatever. The the legal structure is important, the social service structure is important, and then the culture is important. And even in places where the legal structure and the social services are there, the culture changes from city to city, right? So like you're in LA, it's very LGBTQ friendly, but then you drive to somewhere in maybe more rural California, and it's pretty openly like you don't want to be open about who you are here, right?
There used to be this sort of expectation that our medical records and the things we talk about in certain spaces privately are private
Mhm.
spaces. That expectation, I think, should be not assumed anymore, right? Like all
Right.
that stuff is questionable at best. So
Yeah. It is, and it is a uneven terrain, if you will. Like I cannot drive across the country without having to do an extensive amount of research of how my human rights change from place to place. So, like for instance, like I mentioned Idaho. Like Idaho has, among other states, has a trans ban. You can't go to the restroom if you're trans. In Utah, it's maybe a little different. Like you can't use state-run government facilities. Which so if you want to go to get your driver's license at the DMV, that's now a state facility. You can't use the restroom there if you're trans, or you have to like I would have to use the men's room, which would probably cause issues, right? Trans men would have to use the women's room. Like it's chaotic, right? And I would say to some extent unenforceable. Like how do you expect to enforce this? So like let's touch on that. The thing I brought up earlier, targeting trans people means that like let's say like the bathroom laws, for instance, like hey, you're not allowed to use the restroom if you're a trans person. On the very surface, maybe if you're a unobservant person, or if you're maybe don't know what transness means, you think okay, sure, that's fine. Maybe they can just use their own restrooms or something like that. But what that really does is it now makes this culture of investigating everyone to see if they fit in the gender that I expect them to be, right? So every woman who has short hair now becomes suspect. Every man who doesn't look manly enough is now suspect in the men's room. So it doesn't just hurt us, it hurts everyone. And there's many stories of women being thrown out of like cisgender women being thrown out of women's restrooms because somebody just didn't think they looked enough like a woman. They were too tall or they had a deep voice or whatever, right? It creates an environment of hate. It creates an environment of violence and lack of safety. And maybe it's has us on the tagline. Maybe like we are the intended target, but the actual collateral damage isn't just us. Of course, we feel it, but it hurts everyone, right? In Tennessee, there's a bill that is known as the Transgender Registry Bill. Essentially, that medical providers have to register with the state when someone comes to them as a trans person and says, "Hey, I'm seeking medical care." And they basically have to put these individuals' medical data into a database that is publicly available so that not just the state, but that anybody who goes to this database can look up and say, hey, there's this many trans people in Davidson County or whatever it is. It's still unclear. And see, here's the thing, like it's not like a very well written law. We don't know if it means like they're going to put people's names up there. We don't know if they're going to put, specific medical history. Like it's very poorly written, right? And so existing in these gray areas is exhausting. You're like, oh, like how much of my medical data is going to be not just belong to the state now, but also be part of a public database where people can roll up to my house. Like if they, like, is my address going to be there? I don't know. So if they can do that to us, they can do that to anyone, right? And of course, like we've all heard this quote, right? They came for it quote, right? LGBTQ people and especially trans people are a pretty small minority of the population. So I think that it hasn't hit home yet for the rest of American society because it's like, oh, that's just a few people on the fringe. Okay, yeah, it starts with a few people on the fringe, but they're testing out in the state legislatures, they're testing out these policies and then putting them into practice at states or potentially at the federal level to see like how much can we get away with? Who can we oppress? And nobody will say anything, no one will notice, right? There's a if you think about the timeline structure too, there's the like trans people have really were not part of the national conversation until about 2015 is when like of course people knew about it before then, but it wasn't part of the national political conversation until about 2015, and there's multiple reasons for that. Maybe some celebrities came out that were trans, so you have Caitlyn Jenner and you have people like that who were on the national stage. And around that time, around 2015, there were some early efforts to restrict trans people's rights, either going to the bathroom or trans kids playing sports, things like that. And that like there were maybe 30 or 40 bills, something like that in the state level. Since 2015, that number has like skyrocketed. There's a website that I'll send you called the Trans Legislation Tracker. Every day that I check it, the number goes up. There's right now at this only the state level, I'm not talking about federal even. At the state level, there is over 1,000 bills that have been proposed, not passed, but proposed that in some way restrict trans people's rights, right? Some of them have been put into practice. So Kansas famously rescinded all trans people's legal documents that said basically like you have no option. You have to come back in and we're going to change your birth certificates and driver's license, all your legal documents to say the gender that we want you to be. That doesn't sound maybe to someone who that hasn't happened to, that doesn't sound that terrible. Like, oh, they're just going to change a piece of paper. But that affects getting a job, getting an apartment, getting health care, right? It affects all these things. And it is if they can put you on a list and if they can rescind your documents, if they can do it to us, they can do it to anybody. It also hurts me as a trans person, and it also hurts any person, especially women, but a person who's been married and they've changed their name, right? How is that justice? How is that democracy? And how is that fair?